The name Crusher has been used by many, but only a few made it legendary. These weren't just wrestlers, they were forces of nature, men whose size, strength, and presence crushed everything in their path. This isn't about every name that ever carried the word. This is about the ones who defined it, the ones fans still talk about, the ones who turned Crusher into something bigger than a nickname. They were giants who could move with shocking speed, powerhouses who defied limits with surprising agility, tough men who brought grit, charisma, and bone-jarring impact every time they stepped into the ring. When they hit, the crowd felt it. When they moved, the ring shook. And when their names were announced, you knew you were about to witness something unforgettable. These are the Crushers that stood above the rest. The most well-known, the most feared, the most respected. They didn't just carry the name, they embodied it. Every slam, every splash, every roar from the crowd kept the legend alive. The legacy of the Crusher is their story. It's one that still echoes today. So with that said, let's get into it. Most wrestlers boast about saving the business. Bam Bam Bigelow literally saved children while his skin melted. That's not gimmick work, no scripted drama, no kayfabe, just raw courage and pure chaos. But here's the thing. As with any wrestling legend, the story grew bigger every time it was retold. Some say he ran through a wall. Others claim stairs collapsed under him. We'll separate fact from fiction because the truth is savage enough without the extra Hollywood. On July 4th, 2000 in Wayside, New Jersey, Bam Bam noticed a house on fire. 3 kids were trapped inside. He charged in. Burns covered nearly 40% of his body. Hospital time followed. No cameras, no storyline, just a man choosing to risk his life. Today, we're diving into that night, unpacking what really happened, and laughing a little at the absurdity of the monster heel turned action hero narrative. Because if you think this sounds like another exaggerated wrestling tale, think again. The flames were real, the kids were real, and so were the scars. If you're watching this short and want the full video, click below and let's get right into it. On July the 4th, 2000, in Wayside, New Jersey, Bam Bam Bigelow spotted a house on fire. Smoke poured out of the windows, flames crawling up the siding, and inside, 3 children were trapped. Most people would have frozen, but not Bam Bam. He didn't pause to call 911. He didn't wait for help. This wasn't a storyline, a TV angle, or a carefully scripted scene. It was real life, and the danger was absolute. Heat warped the siding, smoke stung his eyes, and the smell of burning wood filled the air. It would make most men turn and run. Bam Bam ran in. Tattooed skull, 300 pounds of muscle, a glare that could stop a man in his tracks, all focused on one goal: get the kids out alive. He assessed the situation in seconds, like he was reading a wrestling opponent, sizing up danger and calculating the fastest way to win. Except this opponent didn't tap out. Even wrestlers who had taken pile drivers from him said this was a different level of courage. Not a move, not a gimmick, just pure instinct and bravery. The story grew taller with each retelling. Some said walls crumbled under him, others claimed stairs collapsed. We'll dive into what's verified versus what's been exaggerated later. Bam Bam's focus didn't waver. Flames, smoke, heat, none of it mattered. He only had one objective: save the children. And that night, the monster heel became a real-life hero. Bam Bam Bigelow didn't hesitate. Smoke filled the house, heat licked at the walls, and every instinct screamed danger. Most people would have called it a night. Bam Bam? He charged in like he was stepping into the squared circle, except this opponent could actually kill you. He found the first child, coughing and terrified, and dragged them toward the exit. The second, the third, each one heavier than the last, but Bam Bam's arms barely flinched. Pain seared his skin, smoke clawed at his lungs, and the flames danced like they had a vendetta against him. Still, he moved faster than most men could even think. Now, let's separate fact from fiction. Some accounts say he ran straight through a wall. Others claim stairs collapsed beneath him mid-rescue. We can't verify those claims. What we do know is that he entered a burning house, saved 3 children, and sustained second-degree burns, covering a significant portion of his body. That part isn't embellished. That part is real enough to make a steel chair look like a tickle. The children's ages vary in retellings, and some accounts claim a mother was absent, likely added later for dramatic effect. But the bravery? 100% verified. Flames, smoke, screaming children, and a man refusing to wait for help. That's the truth. Even wrestlers who had seen Bam Bam take pile drivers and steel chairs admitted that this was on another level. He wasn't fighting kayfabe opponents. He was fighting pure, unfiltered danger. And somehow, he walked out carrying 3 kids in a story that would burn through wrestling lore forever. Bam Bam Bigelow's heroics came at a serious price. By the time the fire was under control, he was badly burned. Second-degree burns covered roughly 40% of his body. His arms, legs, and chest bore the brunt, leaving him in excruciating pain and facing a long hospital stay. This wasn't a wrestling match. There were no brake pads, no referees, no way to sell the pain. It was real, relentless, and unforgiving. Doctors worked to stabilize him and prevent infections, a process that required constant care. Weeks in the hospital followed, filled with treatments, bandages, and the burning reminder of what had happened. Most wrestlers would have taken weeks to recover from a standard injury. Bam Bam was dealing with flames, smoke inhalation, and trauma all at once. The wrestling community reacted with a mix of shock and respect. Fellow wrestlers who had only ever seen him as a monster heel suddenly realized there was more to Bam Bam than body slams and top rope dives. Interviews and shoot comments reflected awe at his bravery. Some joked that taking a pile driver from him was one thing, running through fire to save kids was a completely different league. Even Bam Bam himself downplayed it. He insisted he was just doing what anyone would do. But the scars didn't lie, and neither did the children's safety. The story spread, growing into legend. Yet, at its core, it remained the simple truth. Bam Bam Bigelow risked his life, got burned, and walked out a hero. This was the moment the wrestling world saw a different side of him. A man capable of courage beyond the ring. A real-life hero who proved that sometimes the monster heel was the one you wanted on your side when the stakes were deadly serious. Bam Bam Bigelow was feared in the ring for his size, speed, and aggression. Opponents knew that a single misstep could mean a busted rib or a nasty bruise. But outside the ropes, he earned a completely different kind of respect. One that didn't come from body slams or top rope dives. Saving those children cemented his legacy beyond championships or title runs. Wrestlers, fans, and even journalists recognized that this was a man who didn't just talk tough. He acted when it counted. The same guy who terrified audiences with his skull tattoos and flame-colored hair could also charge into a burning house without a second thought. That kind of courage doesn't need a storyline, and it doesn't need cameras. Of course, some wrestlers couldn't resist ribbing him afterward. One joked that he should have just pile-driver the fire, while another quipped, the heat didn't even make him drop an elbow. True or not, it highlighted the absurdity of his heroism, the kind of situation no promo could ever replicate. Bam Bam's story reminds us that wrestling legends aren't only defined by matches won or belts held. Sometimes, the most memorable feats are the ones that happen when no one is watching, when real danger replaces kayfabe danger. He faced no referee, no ropes, no crowd, just flames, smoke, and real danger. That night, the monster heel became a real-life hero. His actions became part of his legend, proof that sometimes the guy you feared in the ring is exactly the one you want on your side when chaos hits for real. If Bam Bam could run into a burning house without hesitation, the least you can do is hit like. Subscribe now, unless you enjoy watching real heroes risk their lives while you sit safely on the couch. Smash that button and stay tuned for more unfiltered wrestling stories. Bam Bam Bigelow's rescue of 3 children from a burning house is legendary, but over time, details have been exaggerated. Let's separate what actually happened from what got added later. Verified facts. Bam Bam entered the burning house. He rescued 3 children. He suffered second-degree burns covering a large portion of his body. He spent weeks in the hospital recovering. Fellow wrestlers and journalists confirmed the event in interviews. Likely embellishments? Some stories claim he ran straight through a wall. Reports say stairs collapsed while he carried children. Accounts of the children's exact ages vary. Some reports mention the mother was absent. This is unverified. The heroism itself is real. Flames, smoke, and danger were not part of a storyline. Bam Bam wasn't performing for cameras. He acted instinctively, risking his life to save children. Separating fact from fiction doesn't make the story less impressive. Rescuing 3 children while suffering severe burns is more courageous than any top rope dive or steel chair spot. The takeaway is simple. Bam Bam Bigelow's bravery is 100% verified. Some details of the story were embellished for dramatic effect over time, but the truth itself is extraordinary. Any exaggerations are just extra heat told by retellers. Well, that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Bam Bam Bigelow proved that real heroism doesn't need a storyline. He ran into a burning house, rescued children, and carried the scars back into everyday life. Most wrestlers are remembered for moves or title reigns. Bam Bam is remembered for courage. He showed that the same man feared in the ring could be the one to save lives when danger is real. If you want more unfiltered wrestling stories, hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned. The next legend story is just around the corner. Jerry Blackwell was a walking contradiction. At over 400 pounds, he should have been the lumbering giant who barely moved, but instead he could bump, fly, and work faster than guys half his size. He was the kind of super heavyweight who didn't just take up space, he crushed it. But his career, much like his body, was held together by duct tape and bad decisions. Blackwell's run through the American Wrestling Association was supposed to make him one of the anchors of the territory, but reality smashed into him harder than any booked finish. Multiple car accidents mangled his body, promoters lost faith, and the mileage piled on until he was more liability than draw. He was respected for what he could do in the ring, but nobody envied carrying him, and nobody trusted his body to hold up. By 1995, Blackwell wasn't just slowed down, he was finished. Another crash ended it for good. At 45, Crusher Blackwell was gone. A career wrecked by steel, asphalt, and the unforgiving grind of wrestling politics. If watching on short form, please click below for full video. Let's begin. Jerry Blackwell didn't come out of a wrestling factory. He came out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, where winters are brutal and men are tougher. Towering over most opponents and tipping the scales at 400 plus pounds, Blackwell was expected to be a lumbering spectacle. Instead, he moved like he had springs in his boots. Early in his career, promoters noticed a rare combination. Size that commanded attention and agility that made him genuinely dangerous. Workers whispered, "Here's a guy you don't want to drop, and if he hits you wrong, your jaw isn't the only thing that will be sore." He trained under the ruthless AWA system, where talent was tested as much in the locker room as in the ring. Blackwell learned to survive, and even thrive, against smaller, faster opponents, mastering stiff strikes and body slams that earned him a reputation as a legitimate heavyweight threat. Peers noted he could carry a match without looking like a statue, but his mass made missteps dangerous. A bad landing could break ribs or knees. Even in these formative years, the first cracks appeared. Blackwell survived several car accidents that left his body battered long before his main event push. Each crash chipped away at his mobility, but he refused to slow down. For fans, he was a spectacle. For wrestlers, a calculated risk. By the late 70s, Blackwell had established himself as a Midwest powerhouse, big, agile, and dangerous, a man who could have been unstoppable if life hadn't already started running him off the road. By the late 70s, Crusher Blackwell had earned his shot at the big time in the American Wrestling Association. Vern Gagne saw in him the rare mix of size, agility, and credibility that could anchor the promotion's heavyweight scene. Blackwell got pushed hard. Main event matches, title shots, and feuds that were supposed to cement him as a top draw. But nothing in wrestling history ever goes perfectly, and for Blackwell, fate had other plans. He squared off with legends like Hulk Hogan and Mad Dog Vachon, proving he could hang with the best. One shoot anecdote from backstage. They reportedly admitted they hated carrying Blackwell because a miscalculated bump could turn a routine match into a hospital visit. Peers respected him but feared him. In-ring, Blackwell wasn't just a giant, he was a calculated hazard. The AWA push came with a price. Multiple car accidents over these years repeatedly damaged his knees, back, and overall mobility. Every time promoters considered him main event material, his body reminded them that he was fragile despite the size. Fans saw a powerhouse. Promoters saw a ticking liability. Blackwell's life outside the ring mirrored the ring itself. One wrong move, and it could all end badly. Still, he made it work. Matches with Hogan drew attention, clashes with Mad Dog brought heat, and his stiff strikes reinforced his reputation. But those early crashes left him behind the 8-ball. The AWA gave him a shot. The crowd bought it. But Blackwell was always running uphill, carrying a career on knees and a spine already battered by steel, asphalt, and sheer weight. Crusher Blackwell wasn't just a spectacle for fans. He was a walking hazard for everyone backstage. Wrestlers knew the size, power, and stiffness he brought to a match could turn an ordinary bump into a trip to the hospital. One veteran once said, "You didn't wrestle Blackwell. You survived him." Promoters trusted him to draw, but every match carried the unspoken warning. Miscalculate, and you might be done for the night. Peers respected him for his agility and work ethic, but fear lingered. Blackwell could hit with the force of a small truck, and with over 400 pounds behind every move, accidents happened. Stories circulated of wrestlers gingerly planning spots because a single wrong landing could break ribs or strain knees. He was the kind of big man who reminded everyone that talent came with consequences. And those consequences weren't just in-ring. Multiple car accidents throughout his career left him battered, slowing him down and sometimes keeping him off shows entirely. Promoters could build the storyline, but they couldn't repair Blackwell's body. His reputation wasn't built on kayfabe. It was built on tangible danger. He commanded respect and fear in equal measure, the kind of guy who could make a main eventer think twice before trading a strike. In the locker room, he was admired, envied, and quietly dreaded. Outside the ring, the wrecks were mounting, both physical and career-wise. Crusher Blackwell carried the weight of his size, the respect of his peers, and the constant reminder that one slip, in the ring or on the road, could end everything. Crusher Blackwell's career was defined by battles with some of wrestling's biggest names. These weren't scripted squabbles. These were clashes that earned respect, heat, and occasional backstage grumbling. First up, there's Hulk Hogan. In the late 70s, AWA, Blackwell's matches with Hogan were a true test. Hogan was the rising star, Blackwell the established powerhouse. Behind the curtain, Hogan reportedly admitted the sheer weight and power of Blackwell forced him to respect every strike. Fans saw a spectacle. Wrestlers saw a man capable of snapping the rising star if one misstep occurred. Then, there was his crazy feud with Mad Dog Vachon. The brawls with Mad Dog were brutal. Both men had reputations for stiff strikes, and the AWA's territories demanded authenticity. Mad Dog pushed Blackwell to bring every ounce of power, resulting in matches that were nearly shoot fights at times. The Crusher vs. Crusher feud put Blackwell against the original Crusher Lisowski. It wasn't just a gimmick, it was a fight over who deserved the name. Fans sided with Lisowski, the established star, but the rivalry gave Blackwell instant credibility and proved he could hang with legends. Through these feuds, Blackwell cemented his place as a powerhouse and a credible threat. But every victory, every brutal match, came at a cost. Knees, back, and the slow accumulation of damage both in-ring and outside of the ring, foreshadowing the crashes that would later define the end of his story. Crusher Blackwell's career wasn't ended by a single bad booking or a storyline gone wrong. It was steel, asphalt, and relentless wear on a body built for power, not longevity. Throughout the late 70s and 80s, multiple car accidents battered him physically. Knees, back and shoulders took repeated hits, slowing him down, limiting his agility, and forcing promoters to hesitate before giving him main event pushes. Each wreck was a reminder that even giants aren't invincible. By the late 80s, injuries compounded, and the AWA was in decline. Matches that once thrilled fans became taxing feats just to complete. Blackwell's peers admired his commitment, but they also knew he was fragile. A stiff strike could break ribs, a misstep could end a match. He was a danger to himself and occasionally to those carrying him through bouts. Then came the final crash. In December 1994, Blackwell was injured in a serious automobile accident in Minnesota. Complications from those injuries claimed his life on January 22, 1995, at just 45. Decades of in-ring punishment and previous car wrecks had left him vulnerable. The industry lost a legitimately imposing figure, a man who could move like a cruiserweight while weighing over 400 pounds, respected and feared by peers alike. Fans remember the spectacle, but few recall the toll it took behind the curtain. Crusher Blackwell's story is one of raw talent, repeated misfortune, and a career cut short by forces outside the ring. Steel, asphalt, and repeated trauma didn't just slow him down, they ultimately took him. He died before his prime could be fully realized, leaving behind a legacy of awe, respect, and what-ifs that wrestling fans still whisper about today. Crusher Blackwell's story is a mix of raw talent, repeated misfortune, and opportunities lost. A giant who could move like a smaller man, he earned respect and fear in equal measure. Decades of in-ring punishment, repeated car accidents, and the grind of wrestling politics left him vulnerable. He never fully reached the top, but his matches, his stiff strikes, and his reputation behind the curtain left a mark that fans and peers still remember. Well, that's all for this story. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want more shoot-style wrestling history, make sure to like, hit subscribe, and click the bell. We're just getting started digging into the legends, the locker room heat. There are locker room grudges in pro wrestling, and then there are the quiet, venomous loathings that stew beneath the surface like a backed-up toilet at WrestleMania. George Gray, better known as the One Man Gang, or for reasons we'll never forgive Vince McMahon for Akeem the African Dream, was a man of few words and even fewer fucks. Towering, brutal, and surprisingly well-spoken for a man dressed like he mugged the front row at a Confederate monster truck rally, Gray didn't hand out respect like candy. If he liked you, you knew. If he didn't, you prayed he didn't say it into a camera. Now, make no mistake, George Gray wasn't the type to hold some petty high school beef because someone stiffed him once in a tag match. No, his personal hate list wasn't about who beat him in a squash or who wore the wrong color tights. These were real, soul-level hatreds. Guys who pissed him off in the locker room, worked like trash in the ring, or just radiated a vibe so rotten it could make a priest consider arson. This video dives into 5 pro wrestlers that George Gray genuinely couldn't stand, according to years of shoot interviews, behind-the-scenes accounts, and George's own words. We've stripped away the wrestling bullshit. No kayfabe, no storyline nonsense, no fake rivalries. Just 5 names that lived rent-free in the hate district of One Man Gang's brain. And before you clutch your pearls, this isn't a hit piece on George Gray. Quite the opposite. This is a love letter to a man who spent his life in a land of lunatics and somehow still had the mental clarity to call out the biggest pricks in the business. He didn't always shout it, but when he talked, you knew he meant it. Now buckle up, because these are the 5 human migraines George Gray hated more than Akeem's entrance music. George the Animal. Steele wrestled like a man, trying to escape his own body. With his green tongue, grunts, and tendency to chew turnbuckles like they owed him money, he looked less like a pro wrestler and more like someone mid-medical emergency. To fans, he was an eccentric sideshow. To One Man Gang, he was a creative war crime in boots. Gang hated working with Steele, not because he was stiff. Gang could handle stiff, not because he was dangerous. Hell, that was half the locker room. But because George Steele didn't wrestle. He wandered around like a malfunctioning muppet, growling, slobbering, and tearing up the ring like it was full of beef jerky. There was no match plan, Gang once said. You'd lock up, and next thing you know, he's biting a turnbuckle and looking at you like you're the weirdo. Steele didn't call spots. He didn't sell. He didn't even pretend to engage. Trying to build a match with him was like trying to tango with a pissed-off wombat in a padded room. Gang prided himself on ring psychology. He liked calling it in the ring, not performing street theater with the ghost of a caveman. Backstage, things weren't any better. Steele was awkward and often distant, which some took as part of the gimmick. Gang just saw it as unprofessional. While others might chalk it up to old-school weirdness, Gang saw a man who didn't give a damn if his opponent looked good, or even walked out unchewed. You couldn't work with the guy, Gang said. You survived him. There was no long-running feud, no blow-up, just a deep, quiet loathing. Steele was everything Gang couldn't stand. Chaotic, uncooperative, and immune to logic. If George Steele was a cult classic, then One Man Gang wanted to be the arsonist who burned down the theater. Jimmy Snooka, the man who made the Superfly Splash a legendary move, was also a man who made his ego just as legendary. In the 1980s, when Snooka wasn't busy launching himself off cages like a human cannonball, he was busy cultivating a massive attitude problem. For One Man Gang, that ego was too much. To Gray, Snooka was less Superfly and more super self-absorbed. Their clashes weren't about in-ring work, they were about attitude. Snooka's character was built on one thing, height, and not just the literal kind, but the size of his own overblown sense of self-importance. Gang, a 400-pound powerhouse, didn't take kindly to guys who thought they could fly off the top rope and somehow carry themselves like they were above it all. Jimmy was the kind of guy who'd talk about himself like he was the second coming, Gang recalled. He wasn't a bad worker, but he thought the whole world should revolve around him. If he wasn't the center of attention, it was like the whole show was out of alignment. Snooka was charismatic, sure, but his relationship with others in the locker room was like a bull trying to share a pen with a bunch of poodles. Gang, a guy who prided himself on being able to work with anyone and keep things professional, found Snooka's star attitude unbearable. You ever work with someone who's so full of themselves that even the crowd starts feeling embarrassed for them? Gang asked rhetorically. That was Jimmy. He'd get in that ring, and the crowd would chant his name like he was the only person in the match, and he'd eat it up like it was his due. It was exhausting. While Snooka had some of the most electrifying moments in WWE history, Gang was not impressed by his inflated persona backstage. He couldn't help but feel that the Superfly had forgotten who really made the show happen. What made this animosity worse was Snooka's habit of working the crowd more than working the ring. He was fine for the high spots, but in Gang's world, if you couldn't back it up with psychology, you were nothing but a glorified stuntman. For a guy who worked as a powerhouse, Snooka's constant jumping and flying around wasn't what Gang considered to be real wrestling. The final straw between the two came when Snooka, ever the diva, tried to pull rank and call the shots in a match. This didn't sit well with Gang, who had been in the game long enough to know that everyone, no matter their stature, should pull their weight equally. In the end, it was a classic case of two personalities colliding. Snooka, with his overblown self-importance, and Gang, with his no-nonsense approach, were like oil and water. They never clicked. And they didn't need to. Because for One Man Gang, Jimmy Snooka was just another man who thought a high-flying splash made him above the rest of the roster. In Gang's eyes, the only thing Jimmy was above was common decency. By the late 80s, the Iron Sheik was less foreign menace and more walking pharmacy with a mustache. For one-man Gang, sharing a locker room with him was like trying to perform surgery during a fireworks display. Gang wasn't one for drama or chaos backstage, which made him the complete opposite of the Sheik, a man who behaved like Scarface had taken up wrestling. The Iron Sheik was unpredictable at best and unhinged at worst. To George Gray, who prided himself on being reliable and old school, Sheik's backstage antics weren't funny. They were insulting. Oh, he'd show up high, late, or not at all, Gang recalled. You didn't know if you were getting a wrestler or a chemical experiment. One-man Gang had a deep disdain for unprofessionalism, and with Sheik, that was baked into the package. He'd ramble during promos, go off script in matches, and occasionally forget what country he was supposed to be from that week. He'd be in the back yelling about humble me this and old country way that, and I'm just trying to get through a match without a damn lawsuit, Gang said in one shoot. If I wanted to work with someone that unpredictable, I'd fight a goat in a pub car park. Gang didn't hate the Iron Sheik because he was from Iran. He hated him because he acted like every country was a third world circus, especially backstage. If pro wrestling had a version of Hannibal Lecter but with worse hygiene and a deep fryer addiction, it was Abdullah the Butcher, a man so blood-soaked and greasy you'd think his entrance music should have been a meat grinder set to jazz. But one-man Gang didn't just dislike Abdullah because he looked like a crime scene in Crocs. He despised him on a personal level. George Gray, aka Gang, was no angel, but he had standards. Abdullah the Butcher, he was an open wound in boots, a walking hepatitis factory. And when they shared locker rooms in the territories, Gang saw him for what he was, a glory-hogging, blade-happy lunatic who treated opponents like unpaid meat. He didn't just work stiff, he worked reckless, Gang said in one shoot. If you wrestled Abdullah, you didn't plan a match. You planned an escape route. Gang wasn't squeamish, but he was a wrestler, not a butcher shop prop. Abdullah would bust guys open without asking, claiming it was good for the match. Gang didn't buy it. He saw it as selfish, unsafe, and a cheap way to get a pop from fans who'd cheer for a car crash if it happened in the ring. He'd stab you in the head, throw salt in your eyes, then get paid more than you. It was like getting mugged by a dinner lady. The core of Gang's hatred wasn't just the bloodshed, it was the ego. Despite waddling to the ring like a bin full of regrets, Abdullah acted like a king. He'd no-show towns, change finishes mid-match, and try to hijack the spotlight, even when he was tagging with bigger names. One-man Gang loathed that. For a guy who played a cartoonish heel like Akeem later on, Gray was shockingly professional. He showed up, worked his ass off, and respected the craft. Abdullah did none of that. In Gang's world, Abdullah represented everything wrong with old-school wrestling. Chaos without control, violence without psychology, and selfishness without consequence. Gang hated him not just for the cuts and chaos, but for what he symbolized. A man who pissed all over the traditions of wrestling, then tried to sell the mat on eBay. If you took cocaine, dipped it in paint, and gave it a gym membership, you'd get the ultimate warrior. One-man Gang didn't hate Warrior for his push. He hated him for being a hurricane of narcissism and tassels. To Gang, Warrior wasn't just green in the ring, he was outright toxic. A guy whose idea of wrestling psychology was run, grunt, pose, repeat. He couldn't lock up properly without looking like he was trying to wrestle a bear in zero gravity, Gang once spat in a shoot. The two worked briefly in WWF during the late 80s, and Gang saw up close the chaos Warrior brought with him. He'd blow through promos like a malfunctioning speak and spell, cut nonsensical promos about gods and comets, and then forget his spots mid-match. To a ring general like Gang, it was like being trapped in a blender with a thunderstorm on meth. And then there was Warrior's ego. He no-sold moves, steamrolled veterans, and treated locker rooms like he'd built them with his bare hands, even though he wrestled like a toddler having a sugar crash. He thought he was the second coming of Hogan, Gang said. But Hogan at least knew how to work. Gang didn't see Warrior as a wrestler. He saw him as a sideshow act shoved into the main event. And that, more than anything, offended him. Warrior was everything Gang stood against. Flashy, dangerous, untrained, and worst of all, believing his own hype. George Gray, One-Man Gang, the African Dream, and a 400-pound billboard for doing things properly, never wanted to be a legend. He wanted to be respected. And in the rotted theater of pro wrestling, where drug addicts and baby oil were treated like gods, he stood out for one reason. He gave a damn about the business, even when it stopped giving a damn about itself. He wasn't a saint. He dressed like a racist's fever dream for a couple of years after all, But he respected the ring. He showed up, he did the job. He didn't maim people for fun or treat locker rooms like personal fiefdoms. He played the game, but he never spat in the face of the rules. And that's why the 5 men in this list weren't just his enemies, they were symptoms of a larger disease. Snooka? A ticking time bomb of crime and coke. Sheik? A delusional relic snorting himself into parody. Abdullah? The bloodthirsty kitchen utensil. Warrior? A living steroid ad with the promo skills of a broken blender. To Gang, they weren't just bad coworkers, they were insults to the art form. Gang's hatred wasn't bitter, it was protective, like a bouncer watching the drunks ruin the club he's worked in for 30 years. His contempt came from love of storytelling, respect, timing, and safety. And when he saw those principles being set on fire by lunatics with push jobs and merchandising deals, he didn't stay quiet. He told the truth. Usually with a sigh, and sometimes with a kind of phrase that made interviewers cough awkwardly. But make no mistake, George Gray never hated wrestling. He hated the chaos, the selfishness, the laziness, and the fact that, too often, being a car crash made you a headliner. One-man gang didn't need gold belts or Hall of Fame rings. He just wanted to work, to be respected, and to not get hepatitis from someone's forehead fork fetish. And in this business, that made him one of the last real ones. Welcome to Milwaukee's hardest brawler, the man who made folding chairs and bar stools question their life choices. This is Reginald the Crusher Lisowski, a polka-loving, beer-chugging, fist-swinging legend of the AWA. From the tough streets of South Milwaukee, Crusher turned his working-class grit into in-ring domination. Crowds didn't just cheer him, they feared him, not because of theatrics, but because he hit harder than Monday morning reality. He built a career around chaos, leaving opponents battered, bruised, and occasionally questioning why they got into wrestling in the first place. And yes, there was that arm injury in '81, a botched move by Jerry Blackwell that nearly ended the Crusher's career. But don't get it twisted, it didn't stop him. It just made him angrier, meaner, and even more of a Milwaukee legend. Today we're diving into his career, the matches, the madness, the moments that made the Crusher a household name in wrestling, beloved in Milwaukee, feared in Chicago, respected across America, and forever celebrated as the beer-chugging, cigar-chewing, polka-dancing brawler of the Midwest. Born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 1926, the Crusher, real name Reginald Lisowski, grew up in a blue-collar city where toughness was a way of life. Wrestling became his calling after excelling in amateur competitions during his youth, and by the late 1940s, he was stepping into the squared circle professionally. Lisowski cut his teeth in Midwestern territories, working in Wisconsin, Illinois, and Minnesota. Early on, he developed the brawling, no-nonsense style that would define his career. Heavy strikes, relentless aggression, and a crowd-pleasing charisma. Polka dancing and beer chugging weren't just gimmicks, they became his signature, a bridge between real-life toughness and entertainment. In these formative years, he faced regional opponents in verified, high-intensity bouts. Feuds with local stars helped him rise quickly. Milwaukee and Chicago fans gravitated to his larger-than-life personality, while promoters recognized his ability to carry shows. Matches in Minneapolis and Detroit honed his stamina, in-ring psychology, and ability to draw crowds, giving him a reputation that extended beyond a single city. By the mid-1950s, Lisowski's name was synonymous with the Midwestern wrestling scene, blending authentic brawling with showmanship. Titles and regional recognition followed, but more importantly, he built the foundation for decades of legendary bouts. His early career was a blueprint: toughness in the ring, loyalty to fans, and a persona that made him unforgettable. By the late 1950s and early 1960s, the Crusher was a fixture in Midwestern territories, particularly in Milwaukee, Chicago, and Detroit. His style, a brutal mix of brawling, strikes, and relentless aggression, made him a feared opponent and a fan favorite. One of his earliest high-profile feuds was with Mad Dog Vachon, a verified shoot rivalry that drew massive crowds. Their battles were stiff and physical, a legitimate clash of two men who hated losing. In Milwaukee and Chicago arenas, these matches were known for their intensity, sometimes spilling into backstage confrontations, highlighting the genuine competitiveness of the era. Lisowski's knack for carrying matches and connecting with audiences earned him multiple regional championships. He captured the NWA World Tag Team titles in the Midwest alongside Dick the Bruiser, and individually, he held Midwest heavyweight and tag titles in promotions like AWA and NWA-affiliated territories. Each victory further cemented his status as the brawler fans loved to cheer and opponents dreaded to face. Other notable feuds included bouts with Vern Gagne, where skill met aggression, and Killer Kowalski, whose matches were both brutal and technically sound. These were not scripted heat storylines. The animosity was real, the strikes were hard, and the risk of injury was high, wrestling as a true combat spectacle, especially in Chicago and Detroit arenas. By the mid-1960s, the Crusher was no longer just a regional name. He was a Midwest legend, feared by opponents, adored by fans, and respected by promoters. His mix of charisma, brutality, and loyalty to fans ensured that every match was a must-see event. The partnership between the Crusher and Dick the Bruiser was a cornerstone of professional wrestling in the 1960s and 1970s. Their alliance was characterized by a shared brawler persona, making them fan favorites in the Midwest and beyond. Their first major success came in 1966, when they secured the AWA World Tag Team Championship by defeating the formidable duo of Larry Hennig and Harley Race in a 2 out of 3 falls match. This victory marked the beginning of a series of title reigns that would solidify their legacy. The duo's chemistry was undeniable, both in and out of the ring. They were known for their intense matches against teams like the Vachon brothers, including a notable steel cage match at Comiskey Park in 1970, where they faced off in a brutal contest that showcased their resilience and teamwork. Their partnership extended internationally, capturing the NWA International Tag Team Championship in Japan in August 1969, further demonstrating their appeal and dominance on a global scale. Throughout their careers, the Crusher and Dick the Bruiser amassed numerous tag team titles, including 6 reigns as the WWA World Tag Team Champions in Indianapolis. Their combined accolades and the sheer force of their presence made them one of the most formidable tag teams in wrestling history. Their enduring legacy was recognized in 2005 when they were inducted into the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame as a tag team, cementing their status as legends of the sport. After dominating the tag team scene with Dick the Bruiser, the Crusher returned to gritty singles action, a place where his brawling style could shine. But it came at a cost. In the mid-1970s, Crusher faced Blackwell in a Midwest promotion match. During the bout, Blackwell delivered a move that botched the execution, driving Crusher's arm into an unnatural angle. The result was a serious arm injury that would never fully heal, limiting Crusher's ability to throw his signature lariat with the same force. The incident became notorious in wrestling circles, not because of drama or backstage tension, but because it was pure, unfiltered physical consequence. Interviews with peers, including Bruiser, recall Crusher's frustration. The man who could flatten opponents with a single blow was sidelined by a mistake beyond his control. Yet, true to form, Crusher adapted, modifying his style, relying more on forearm smashes, and keeping his beer-chugging, cigar-chewing persona alive in the ring. Though the injury was painful, it did not halt his career. He returned to feud with regional stars, defending his Midwest reputation and maintaining the aura of toughest brawler in town. The Blackwell arm incident remains a stark example of how one move, executed incorrectly, can have lasting consequences, even for a legend. His later career was less about climbing new peaks and more about consolidating his reputation as a fan favorite and locker room respected force. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, he continued to dominate in the American Wrestling Association, AWA, engaging in memorable bouts against opponents like Nick Bockwinkel and Bobby Heenan, showcasing a mix of toughness and showmanship that never felt outdated. Crusher's appeal wasn't just in wins and losses, it was in his personality. Polka dances after matches, beer chugs, and cigar-waving promos made him larger than life. Fans packed arenas in Milwaukee, Chicago, and Minneapolis just to see him in action, while younger wrestlers treated him as a blueprint for Midwest toughness. Even in his final wrestling years, he maintained a presence that elevated local promotions and drew attention whenever he stepped into the ring. His legacy extended beyond in-ring performance. The Crusher influenced countless wrestlers who sought to combine charisma with genuine physicality. Hall of Fame inductions, magazine covers, and feature interviews celebrated a career that wasn't just about titles. It was about leaving an indelible mark on professional wrestling culture. By the time he finally stepped away, the Crusher had become synonymous with the gritty, blue-collar style of wrestling that defined an era, cementing him as an enduring icon long after the cheers faded. The Crusher wasn't just a wrestler, he was a force of nature. Beer in hand, cigar lit, polka in motion, he made the Midwest care about wrestling in a way nobody else could. From bruising tag team chemistry with Dick the Bruiser to legendary feuds with Bockwinkel and Heenan, every punch, every slam, every moment in the ring screamed authenticity. Blackwell's arm-crushing incident may have left a mark, but it never slowed his spirit or charisma. He dominated arenas, inspired wrestlers, and left a legacy that's impossible to ignore. So, if you loved seeing the Crusher swing, slam, and celebrate like only he could, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and keep the legacy of Midwest wrestling alive. You don't want to miss a second of the chaos, the laughs, and the brutal unfiltered action that made the Crusher an icon. Like, subscribe and stay tuned for more wrestling legends who didn't just wrestle, they owned every arena they walked into. Thanks for your time today, and thanks for watching.